Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckham. My next guest is Colin Hunter. Colin is an author, mentor, coach, and the founder and CEO of PotentialSquared, which is an international business that specializes in creating playgrounds that disrupt the way people are led. Colin focuses on things like building leadership capabilities, strengthening functional capabilities, creating innovative business cultures, and he's also just written a book called Be More Wrong: How Failure Makes You an Outstanding Leader. That book is available for pre-order on Amazon. It comes out September 21st, 2001. I've already pre-ordered my copy, and that's because Colin and I share a lot of the same interest. In the podcast, we talk about those interests, things like positive leadership, storytelling, both the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell other people. The hero's journey, design thinking methodology. We talk quite a bit about personal resilience. We talk about health, sleep, meditation, Buddhism, and we talk a lot about creating positive leadership. Colin and I had a wonderful conversation. Like I said, he has a lot of interests that are really, really interesting to me as well. And so this was a fun conversation for me, and I think it'll be a fun conversation for you to listen to. And now I give you author, mentor, CEO, and all-around good guy, Colin Hunter. Hey, everybody. Brian Beckham here, and I've got Colin Hunter. Colin, how you doing, man? It's really good to have you on the show.
I'm good, Brian. Good to be with you. Yeah, good to be talking to Texas. So
we were just talking about that before the show, and you were telling me that you kind of have grown up you lived in the United States. You're originally from Scotland. You've been around a little bit, and I was telling you that even though I did a 23andMe and I'm about 70% British and Irish, that I live in Texas, and so I have a little bit of an accent. I don't know if you'll hear it or not, but anyway, it really is good to have you on the show. And like I talked about in the introduction, you have a really interesting professional and personal career. You're an author, you're a mentor, you're a coach, you're the founder and CEO of a company called PotentialSquared, and you're coming out with a book that I've already pre-ordered. I love the title. I cannot wait to read the book. It's called Be More Wrong, which I think is a phenomenal title and frankly, a phenomenal topic in general. And so I want to talk about the principles in the book and some of the stuff that you've done. But before we do that, Colin, there will be some people that are listening, probably quite a few people who know who you are, but there will be quite a few people who don't know who you are. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and how you got to where you are today?
So I'm Scottish by birth, so proud of it. If you ever meet the Scottish and Irish, and we were talking about a bit of your Irish heritage, I think, before, but if you talk about anything, I was chatting to a Norwegian today. We've got similarities. So I love the outdoors, love going out and just exploring around the world. I've always traveled. And so I found a job by luck, really. Although they always say the harder you practice, the luckier you get. I think it was Gary Player. But by luck, I found the role. And I was working for Procter & Gamble. Before that, I was in pharmaceuticals. I was in sales and marketing. Before that, I was with Arthur Andersen, which obviously is not on my CV anymore, just because it went under.
Well, and you know, the interesting thing about that is I think the branch that caused it to go under is in Houston. I think it was.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. No, that way, because Enron was in Houston. You remember? I actually had friends that worked at Enron, and they kind of went down together. But anyway, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, so look, you know, in some ways, I was doing what my parents told me to do in a good way. So that was the career advice, and then suddenly I got the opportunity, having left Procter & Gamble, to go do something else. And it was because I'd done an MBA, and I was doing an MBA for a year. I was having fun. I was playing. I was working hard in the MBA, but I was also just looking out the window with friends, looking at the wind to maybe go windsurfing. Following my soccer team, which I'm passionate about. I was having fun. And at the time, it was just almost I rediscovered myself. And I rediscovered myself so much that I fell into a role by being myself. And I'd never thought about it before. I never thought about leadership training, development. And it was somebody who spotted me and failed at an interview in an assessment center and said, you should be hiring Colin. And I'm eternally grateful to him because I've never looked back. And I spent the rest of my life, which is 20 to 30 years, just specializing in creating playgrounds for people who are leaders to disrupt the way they're leading their people. And so therefore, playgrounds is my speciality and I love it. Yeah.
And talk about when you say playgrounds for leadership, talk about what you mean by that, Colin.
Yeah, it's when I look at businesses and I look at the leaders I coach, I could count on one hand how many people are truly happy in their role. And I've always said, you spend most of your life at work. And therefore, I've never had a view that it's life balance, work-life balance. I've always felt it was more of a life balance issue. Therefore, find something you're passionate about and happy about. And I go back to the playgrounds, and for the playground at school was a source of fun, inspiration, exploration. I was terrible at sports.
Danger some of the time, right?
Yeah, and there's a negative connotation to the playground because some people would say, well, school is about, when I was bullied, other things in there. But I take the concept within the playground of the things you enjoy. So everybody has their own version of a playground. I used to work with a guy who he was coaching, consulting at a very top level of a retail organization, massive retail organization in the UK. His idea of fun was working till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, working with a night shift to identify new ways of working and how to operate. That was his playground.
Yeah.
That's what he loved. For other people, we use professional actors. So their version of playgrounds is helping through their acting be able to spot an Alzheimer's patients for a pharmaceutical company. That's a playground for them, using their skills for patient identification, using the skills of the actors to do what we call forum theater, which is explore conversation. So playgrounds is a bit about how do you have fun? How do you enjoy yourself? How do you stretch yourself? Bit of danger. Yeah, there's a bit of fear, and a lot of us will say, look, my biggest fear is actually being myself. I think there's a quote in there somewhere. Yeah. Biggest fear is letting myself go. And, that's exactly what happened to me. I suddenly let myself go. And therefore, if I'm not paying it forward to people and not creating playgrounds, I'm not doing what I love. So that's my playground. And I've spent the rest of my life trying to work on playgrounds that will help other people to work at. Yeah.
What a terrific mission. And, what I found, Colin, is that when I'm doing something where I feel like I'm helping other people or I have purpose, then I feel energy, I feel happiness, I feel excitement. When I'm doing stuff that's only for myself, when I'm being selfish, in other words, I tend to be more low energy. I tend to be in less of a good mood. And so, what you're doing is, and I think, Colin, that unfortunately that too many people in this world don't like what they do professionally or for business. And so, but on the, I'm an optimist, and I would say my hope is that we're going to see massive change in how work looks. And we've already seen that, of course, because of quarantine. I mean, people are now working at home a lot more. They're spending more time with their kids. There's pluses and minuses of that, of course. But what do you see as the future of work?
It's an interesting one for me because, I sat there and I was listening to Deloitte's research on, what's the future of work. And they say, even with AI and machine learning and everything else, there's going to be a place for humans to be part of it. Yeah. And what was interesting is when I mapped the 5 categories that they had against the book that I'm writing and the model we use, it's pretty close because it was about agile. It was about learning. It was about curiosity. It was about this bit about rapport, engaged teaming. So engaged teaming in there. And so therefore, for me, there's this lovely stat that I always quote is when Accenture decided that they would move a lot of jobs and a lot of work into AI and machine learning and automation. They thought that they might lose jobs, but actually they created something like 200,000 more jobs. Might be misquoting that. 200,000 more jobs, because machine learning and AI and everything else is just going to create places for us to be more human. And that's for me is whether it's in service, financial services, we're implementing things like conversational bots where you can do some reviewing and learning as a leader with somebody who is literally a conversational bot. So it's nobody, it's automated. But we're finding those prepare some deeper, more powerful conversations with coaches. So why, rather than paying $1,000 an hour for this high-end coach, why not get prepared for that?
Nice.
So I think the future of work is a mixture of this machine learning, AI, and it releases some of our potential as humans to do deeper, bigger work. And we're always criticizing ourselves or beating ourselves up for not having time to do the things we love. In the future, AI, machine learning might just give us that time to have the opportunity to do something we're passionate about. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know if you know this, but I'm a computer scientist and philosopher by training. I'm professionally now I work as a lawyer, but this idea of artificial intelligence and the future of work has been something that I've been really, really fascinated by for years now. And I couldn't agree with you more on the idea. I think there's people that are really scared and worried that AI will replace their jobs. And I'm here to tell you, it will. There will be jobs in the future that will no longer exist because of AI. But I think the problem that a lot of people make, Colin, which you just brought up, and I think you said it very well, is that's not necessarily bad. Like we want AI to get rid of all the labor intensive, boring jobs that human beings really don't want to do, and frankly shouldn't have to do. So and that'll free up a lot of time and create a whole new other industries. Like here's another good example of that, Colin. I think there's a lot in living in Houston and in Texas, one of the energy capitals of the world. There's a lot of people that are against alternative energy. They think it won't work or whatever. But I'm here to tell all of those people, eventually carbon will run out. We have to do something different. But guess what? Here's the good news. We're going to create trillion-dollar industries around alternative energy. We're going to create companies that will make ExxonMobil look small and tiny. There are vast amounts of riches to be made. And so talk a little bit more. So I think, Colin, there are some people that believe that if AI takes away jobs, people will lose purpose or they will lose meaning. Talk a little bit about what you do where AI is replacing jobs to make sure that people have something to do where they feel like they have some purpose in life.
We've spent probably the last 10 to 15 years looking at different age groups. We've tried, the Gen X, we've tried to solve their problem. We've tried to look at people who are 50 to 60 who are on the retirement end, who suddenly are not relevant or weren't relevant maybe 5-10 years ago to the jobs. Nowadays, if you look at it, whether you're 60, 65, I mean, I'm 55 and I don't think I'll ever retire because
you look great, by the way. You look great.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. For those who can't see me, he's lying. He's lying. No, I'm only joking. But thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. The lighting's good around here. But I do think there's a piece in here about these jobs and these roles. In the future, I don't think we will run out of things to do. And if we think about the list of things that we need to do in society, and even when you look at some of the small companies that are setting up to do social work and social fabric purpose work, there's stuff that we can do in there. But there's the younger generation as they come through have so much more purpose embedded in their soul. Yeah. And they are in some ways, coming back to what you were talking about being selfish earlier on, they have much more of what I would call proper selfishness as well, because they want to do something that motivates them. Yeah. And therefore, AI, the ability to set up a company now digitally is so quick. The ability to do a podcast, I was just playing around the software before this, the ability to craft your own podcast, everything. So you're now getting the opportunity, if you talk to a Tim Ferriss, he would wax lyrically about the opportunity that people have, even with machine learning and AI. Is huge. So I'm a big fan of that. But what I would say is that you've got to find your own purpose. You've got to be purposefully driven around what it is right for you. And I'm a big fan of almost getting people to have adventures to explore that purpose, because so many people go, I want to be a podcast host, which I'm doing now. I'm setting up my own one, which is great.
Good. You should.
Won't be as good as yours, Brian. Yeah, but I'm setting that up, but I'm playing with it. now I actually love it. I'm wondering, why didn't I do this 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
So we've got to start exploring that. But I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, so I'll come back to just to check.
No, it's a great question. It's actually a great answer to the question. And I'll tell you something else when you're talking about starting your own podcast. By the way, I'm very glad to hear you say that. And interestingly enough, I've had, I think, 40 guests now, and quite a few of them have started their own podcast after being on my podcast. And I think this is a classic example. I don't know if you've heard of Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist, but he had a podcast, and I've always been a bibliophile. Like, I love to read. I probably read 50, 60 books a year. But I started realizing, Colin, that not very many people, or not as many people, read books as they used to, because now they're on YouTube, or they're creating videos or watching videos or things like that. And Jordan Peterson made the comment. He said, YouTube will have as much impact on human society as the printing press. And I started thinking about that, and I thought, man, isn't that interesting that nowadays you can literally start a podcast from your house in Scotland or Ireland or Houston, Texas, and reach millions and millions and millions of people. And because the barriers to entry are not what they used to be. 20 years ago, you'd have to have a producer, you'd have to have a media specialist, you'd have to have all this infrastructure and stuff in order to start a quote podcast. But now, you look at a guy like Joe Rogan in the United States, he's got more influence in the mainstream media in many ways.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so the opportunities are just almost limitless at this point. So what do you tell, especially younger people, but the people you mentor and coach, about taking advantage of some of these amazing opportunities the future is going to present?
I think that the thing I say, I've got a passion at the moment, so I'm working on a project for 18 to 20-year-olds. And what I'm trying to do is get a couple of things in place, because I'm a big fan of equity. So I'm a big fan of giving people equal opportunity. I describe myself as a father of daughters, and I've got 2 teenage daughters sitting next door, hopefully being quiet at this time of night, which is tough. I think it's more tough for the mother being quiet than it is for them, but they've been quiet. But I'm trying to give them a really good opportunity to do that. But there's some basic skills that they need to learn. So if you look at, we talk about 3 C's: confidence, conviction, and connection. Yeah. And the confidence is the vocal and the physicality of being able to speak effectively and listen effectively. And you and I will know that, podcast hosts, even when you break them down, there's some who just build that rapport naturally. There's some you go on, you just feel, wow, there's just a natural rapport to the way they do it. And that's confidence. Yeah. My funny story of confidence is, I once got off an airplane. There's a gentleman got off before us, and he strode with purpose, and 10 of us just strode with purpose after him because we felt like he knew where he was going. It was only when he turned into the restroom that we decided we weren't going the same way he was. So, it was that point. So confidence is a real ability, and we're using the actors to bring that to life. But the conviction is the major thing, because it's about values. So are you living your values? And that can be, money is a value. Making money is a value. And I'm a big fan of profit is freedom. So for the young people, earning to work, to live, to create. And there's so many really good people. I mean, I'm joking aside, I'm slightly older, but there's a number of people who I work with, who I'm great friends with, who are tattooed to the hilt. In my day, you had a tattoo, you wouldn't have had a job. You wouldn't have exposed it.
Yeah, exactly.
But now they're tattooed. Shout out to Sean at my local coffee house, who's gone on to great things at a restaurant. But he is one of the nicest, most eloquent, service-led people I've ever met, because he's got conviction. And I would walk through walls for that guy. So he's got what I would call conviction. Yeah. But the most important third one is connection, the ability to build rapport and dance with the music that's put in front of you. And so many people just don't have that natural ability to connect and build rapport in the moment and adjust their style. So those are the 3 things that we want to bring to 18 to 20-year-olds: use of actors, other things, playgrounds, to give them a chance to really explode and explore. And I'm not saying they don't have it, because there's some brilliant people out there. There's a guy called Marcus Rashford, a soccer player in the UK, who's doing more for causes and humanity and the ability to speak. And he started from a very low level. He's just brilliant at what he does. So, but it's about giving everybody that almost that equal chance to fly. And wouldn't that be great if we had that level of quality in our workforce from an early age? It would be superb. Yeah,
for
so
sure.
that's what I'm
For
trying
sure.
to do.
So you've mentioned before, you've mentioned actors. Talk about when you're talking about actors and virtual reality and some of the actual practical coaching you do, like how does it work on a practical level?
Yeah, so let me take the actors, because again, there's a guy called Mark Huggins who's no longer with us, but he and I worked up, and we'd watched Whose Line Is It Anyway? So we talked about improv. And if you've ever got together with a bunch of actors, they can't help but quote comedy, the Office, whatever it is, the program. They can't help but Ricky Gervais gets a mention, everything else gets a mention. And we were talking about, so how do we make it fun for people to learn how to have conversations? So we created something called Forum Theatre, which, if you can imagine the Whose Line Is It Anyway? You've got comedians in front of the audience, and they're interacting, they're asking for topics. We create 2 actors up front, and we give them a script, a 3-minute script, which is relevant to the audience. And it could be that it's somebody coaching somebody else. So for the person who's being coached, we call that the fixed seat. So this is very visual, but there's a fixed seat, and that person stays in that seat. The other seat is what we call the hot seat. So one of the actors takes it, and for 3 minutes, they do a scene. So you can imagine a scene that's got a mixture of good, mixture of bad, and behavior. And the audience is watching. They're in a semicircle around it. They're watching. At the end of the 3 minutes, they take the remote control. They take control. They're able to give feedback to the hot seat. They're able to say, well, okay, so I think you should be making more eye contact. I think you should be asking more questions. And the actors go back in. But from then on, it's the audience that controls the interaction. Nice. And if you think about the film Airplane, have you ever seen it? You know that scene?
Of course, yeah.
Distressed passenger, woman getting hysterical in there, and the first person's trying to calm her down. You've got that long line of people behind with various influence. It's the same with Forum Theatre, because we're saying, come and have a go at what you are, you want to do in terms of the style. So somebody says, right, I'm going to be tougher. Okay, let's be tougher. And the actors are trained to respond to toughness. So they'll give what we call a proportionate ouch to the pinch that somebody's given in there. So by that, you get 45 minutes of an hour where they just explore different ways of having conversations. Imagine politically or anything else now, if we had a safe space that we could practice how to be more wrong and then be more right with conversations. That's what we create with the actors. It's powerful.
Love it.
Yeah.
I did this exercise years ago. I went to it was a combination of a lawyer training academy, but also a psychology academy. And we did this drill one time where we sat, we put the backs of chairs back to back. So you were sitting in a chair, but you were facing the opposite way of your partner. And you started talking about something that was on your mind that was maybe bothering you. And then the job of the person sitting behind you was to become you and to say what you really thought. And I remember I was doing this drill. This was a long time ago, because it was right when I started my business, 20 years ago or so. And I was saying things like, I'm really nervous about my business. I'm not sure it's going to succeed, and blah, blah, blah. And the person behind me started saying, I've never failed before. I don't want to fear a public. He was literally saying what was in my subconscious mind. Like, he was able to say things and figure out things that were bothering me that I didn't even know how to articulate on my own. So what a powerful, being able to observe people in a situation like that, or listen to somebody is powerful tool. You talked earlier, you mentioned something. I want to come back to this and circle back a little bit. You said you were talking about confidence, conviction, and connection. And then you talked about making money, and money could be a value. And I've always told people, like, you shouldn't be ashamed to make money as long as you're doing it honestly. Like that means you're providing something that people value in the world. Like, sometimes I think business owners and entrepreneurs and people like that are a little shy about saying that they want to make money, and they feel embarrassed by it. But in reality, most of the time, if the system works right, the reason you're making money is because you're making something that people find value in, that people want to buy, right?
Yeah, and you value the work you're doing as well. A lot of people underprice what their product is worth. And there's all these great stats, if somebody values something, they're willing to pay much more than you think they're willing to pay. But if you sell it cheap, a lot of people don't perceive that it's valuable. We've thought this, as a Presbyterian Scot, I always believed that, I wasn't, I shouldn't be charging much. Everybody would be as tight, as we say in the UK, with their money. But actually what we realize, and it's the same with the latest iPhone for me, or, I drive a Tesla, which is great.
Me too. I love it. Favorite car ever. I love it.
It's brilliant. So I'm lucky, but, I would pay for that. So profit is freedom is a key thing. So profit allows me to reinvest in the business. Profit allows me to get, one of my youngest employees, who's now just going to get a promotion and he's going to take on a new role. And it's brilliant. But it's allowed, I met him when he hired me a rental car. And I met him in the car, and he's grown with us. But that profit has allowed me to pay him a salary to get him into a role talking about technology in the platforms, the growth piece.
Have you ever heard the story? You're talking about paying for something of value. Have you ever heard the story about when Pablo Picasso, like somebody asked him to draw a drawing, he like drew a line on a sheet of paper and said, "Okay, that'll be $500." And the person was like, "You're charging me $500 for a line on a sheet of paper?" He goes, "That line on that sheet of paper took me 40 years to learn how to draw," or something to that effect. Yeah.
Love that. It's a great story. Yeah. But you said the art world is a brilliant one. You've got all these artists. There's one artist who basically didn't like their work because they were never happy. And the concept of perfection for me in art, I always have the mantra in my mind, which is I aim for outstanding only. Because if we aim for outstanding, we get great. If we aim for great, we get good. If we aim for good, we get average. And so many people in their purpose and their roles and other things do not go there. So, I'd love people to be able to pay a certain dollar. I've got a speaking engagement model that says, there's some people out there getting $60,000 a day. Now, why do I want to get? I don't really want to get there, but I wanted to be doing something, as you say, that is adding so much value that people might want to pay that. Yeah. And I have the choice, and I think that's a lot of it is about the choice to feel valued. Yeah. Which is important.
A lot of your work, Colin, revolves around the idea of storytelling, and I got to tell you, I'm fascinated by storytelling, and I actually have a reminder I have on my phone that pops up every morning just to remind me that my life is a story, and I can write the story that I want to write. And I can also, by the way, everybody tells themselves a story about themselves. Like you tell yourself a story about you, and you can decide also what story you want to tell yourself. In other words, you can tell yourself you're lazy, you're not doing anything good, or you can tell yourself you're amazing and you're going to be out there working hard. So talk about, because this is truly a super important topic and a big topic in your work, talk about storytelling and how that fits in with leadership.
So I always start with something. So I have a coach called Jamie Smart, and he wrote a book called Clarity. And I paid the price of a small car to have a 3-day session with him. And it was the most amazing thing I've ever done. And he started at the beginning of the 3 days with writing on a flip. He got me to write in the flip chart everything that was wrong with my life. And I had 3 pages of flip chart. I had everything. Like we all, this is what's wrong with my life. And I've got to sort this in my business. And at the end of the 3 days, he went back to this flip chart and he said, "So what's relevant?" And none of it was relevant. Because what he'd done, and the first thing I always start, and there's a coach who's who's on my podcast, Andy Slee, he's coachee of mine, who I worked with for 3 years. And there was that moment, that Forrest Gump moment where he's running and he just stops and he just says, "I'm going," and all his followers are saying, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I've stopped, I'm going home." It was just that moment that he realized he had been trying to do something else for somebody else, and it was to do with his parents and his mantra in his mind. So the story, as you say, he was telling himself in his head, was he was reporting into his headmaster, his father. And he suddenly realized that the only voice he should be listening to is his own. So as you say, the storytelling for me starts with that. And then there's some key principles that I'm taking from somebody else, but are really powerful. One is to be sure about what you're proud about. Yeah.
Nice.
We've done this exercise with our team. which is we've talked about what we're proud about. And then because we have refreshingly direct as a mantra, we say, so chapter 2 is, and where are you now? And as a business, we've been walking around in circles, a bit like Frodo and Sam in The Lord of the Rings, where they get to that point in Mordor.
Yeah.
We've been walking around in circles, just finding the same problem every 2 to 3 years. And we've made a conscious decision to say, we're not walking in circles anymore. We're going to stop. And then chapter 3 is, what is the opportunity? And this is where most of my coaching with stories is, as you say, what's the story you want to craft?
Yeah.
And who's going to be involved? Because I'm a big believer, as you said before, unless you involve other people in the story, it won't happen. So who are you inviting to be? Who's your Sam? Who's your Merry Pippin? Who's your Dumbledore? Who's going to guide you on this to work it? And then the final chapters are, one particularly is about values. And sharing stories about the values you have. I spend probably the 90% of my work talking to people about purpose and identity. Yeah. And what's the identity you want to be. So that's, storytelling is important, but again, stories are only part of it. Living the story is the other bit. So how do you get your own team to create their own stories? So that's the next bit, is teaching leaders how to be almost storyteller teachers themselves, as well as an important bit.
You know, with the storytelling thing, I think back to one of my personal heroes, Winston Churchill, and I've read widely both books he's written and books about him, and he basically told the English or the British people a story during World War II. I mean, he was hearkening back to the days of Queen Victoria and how, you know, we were going to fight on the beaches. We were going to fight on the land. We were going to fight in the air. We will never, ever give up. We will never quit. We will never surrender. That's the British people. And he told the British people a story that they bought, that they believed. I just got done reading another biography of Napoleon, and Napoleon was the same way. Napoleon told a story to the French people about how the French people would be the greatest power in Europe and how that was their destiny. And you know what's amazing to me about this, Colin, and this is something I've been thinking about for a couple of years now, is I think the most powerful thing in the world, the most powerful thing in the world is the power of ideas, and how ideas are oftentimes transported from one person to the other, from one brain to the other, or one group to the other through stories.
Yeah.
And so, boy, how powerful is it that, and stories can also lead us, of course, in the wrong direction if we're telling ourselves the wrong story. And so, so storytelling is a huge part of that. The other thing that some of your work touches on is something called the hero's journey, which I love. The hero's journey, as I understand it, it comes from Joseph Campbell, but it's basically a heuristic. It's a pattern that appears again and again. So talk a little bit about how the hero's journey fits into your work with leadership.
Yeah, so a lot of work in the past has been about behaviors. So we teach somebody how to do this behavior, that behavior. And unless it's based in a system, it doesn't succeed. So it's a bit like, teaching. I once met a woman whose son was a Top Gun instructor. I just was, fantastic. Top Gun helmet. Yeah. And she said they used to fly for an hour and then do 10 hours of debrief afterwards. And they were debriefing about the systems and everything else in this. So the hero's journey is basically a system. If you think about it, the first system is, how do you get your followers together? Yeah. So every culture has a hero's journey. So you take Harry Potter, Hermione, and Ron together. You take, the Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Gandalf as the guide. And there's always the same construct. So the team gets together, the Fellowship of the Ring gets together, and then they have a cause. And the cause is to destroy the ring, or the cause is to defeat Voldemort, who he should not be named. Every hero's journey, you can pick it out for many different stories in here. And then you have a cause, and no matter how divided the group get, they always have the same cause and they're working towards the same cause. But they need resilience. And if you think about today's modern society, there's the same thing. Resilience to try something, fail, try it again, fail, and try towards something, fall towards their purpose and fail towards their purpose. And then they face good and evil, and they have learning, and they have a guide, and they have a mentor who classically teaches them. And though they may go back to the village, they are never the same person. And if you think about growth and learning, we all do this. I left home, I went to university, I had a breakdown when I was 29. I will never be the same person. And even though you might go back to where I was growing up in Newcastle, I went back a different person. The hero's journey is about how you grow and how you develop. And therefore, leadership is about, as a leader, how do I act as the guide for people to have their own journey and how they create their own stories for themselves. So we found that is a brilliant way to get people to think about the system of relationships with their team, system of energy with their team, the system of fresh ideas with their team, and the system of growth. And if you can hit those 4 systems, put them into a hero's journey, cyclical process, iterative process, suddenly your teams just take off. It's an impressive sight. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Now, you just mentioned that you had a breakdown when you were 29. Is that something that you're willing to talk about a little bit publicly?
Yeah, I am. I mean, it's when I look back in it, I look at a number of things. I was trying to be something I was not. I was trying to do a role in a job I shouldn't be doing. But it only really became clear to me when I read a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I don't know
Sure. I've read. I have. Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's powerful to me because
great book.
We don't rise to the level of objectives. So I was on a mission to achieve a manager and then regional manager. I was in Procter & Gamble, so I was achieving that. I wanted a good set of friends. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have children. I wanted to earn this amount of money. And everything was about spending energy out of my life. Nothing was about replacing it. And therefore, the system that I learned was that the body has a system that needs to be fed with sleep, hydration, exercise, diet, all of those things, and taking care of ourselves. So I'm a big believer in Anti-Fragile by Taleb and his
love that. The concept of anti-fragility has come up on my podcast 5 or 6 times. I love that concept. And just for people that don't know what that means, essentially, there's a famous author, and he calls himself a flaneur, which means he's just does everything, and he doesn't have a specific job. But anyway, he wrote a book called The Black Swan, which was an international bestseller. He also wrote a book called Anti-Fragile. And the idea of anti-fragility is there are 3 kinds of systems. One is a system that breaks easily under pressure. And that's a fragile system. One is a system that doesn't break easily under pressure, but eventually it breaks. And then the third kind of system is an anti-fragile system that actually gets stronger under pressure. So when you think about, for example, the example I always think about is lifting weights. When you're lifting weights, you're putting a lot of stress and pressure on your body, but your body actually responds positively to that. You get stronger, you get healthier, things like that. So talk a little bit more about that. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's such an important concept.
You summarized it better than I ever would. I mean, I think when you look at it, because I was on listening to a lecture the other day, and it was from the Center of Resilience, and even they have changed their definition of resilience to be about the ability to thrive in chaos. Basically,
nice, beautiful.
And for me, that's. If you think about how we need to operate, if you're running a business, if you're dealing with service, so if you think about a luxury high-end hotel that we work with, they're constantly having to challenge the service, challenge the raising the bar in what they do. And therefore, they're having to live in a degree of chaos, organized chaos towards a purpose. Therefore, they need to get their team ready to fail. Failure is tough, even though I've written a book on it. When I fail, that little bit of, did I really just fail? I know I wrote a book on it, but I'd love to succeed in this. Yeah. So getting people to be resilient to that moment. I don't know if you've ever seen a brilliant clip where there's a guy who's teaching a gentleman how to play cello. And he talks about how the fact that when we make some mistakes in this music, and he shows this person making a mistake, as soon as we make a mistake, the rhythm of the cello playing goes off and the player's just concentrating on the mistake. Yeah. And he coaches people how to be in that operating mode, which is when you make a mistake, it's like, it's like jazz. I found a different way of playing.
Beautiful.
And that for me is a definition of anti-fragile. How do we get jazz into our leadership and our work life? Just to riff off. I'm not an expert in jazz, but musicians over there go, you don't call it a riff off, but just to be able to operate up into that piece. And that's what we try to do. We try to get people to just play with it, fail a bit, experiment with it. And therefore, just think special forces before they go into action. They're off in Norway, they're off in wherever it is, practicing for every eventuality. How often do we do that in our own businesses with our own people? We don't. So we don't make them anti-fragile. So
Yeah.
that's a concept that I strongly believe in for
I,
myself.
I love that concept. And I'll tell you, I felt like it's 2021 now. And in 2020, I felt like I was getting a little fragile, frankly. I was in quarantine a lot. I was exercising, but I wasn't really pushing myself. And so I took up Brazilian jiu-jitsu, believe it or not, at age 47. And, when I first started doing it, this is to illustrate the example of anti-fragility. When I first started doing it, if somebody put me on the ground or something, or they put a move on me, it would hurt and I would be sore. And it was because my body wasn't used to that kind of maneuver. But what I found is when I fought through that over time, my body got used to it. It's just like any type of exercise. When you start yoga, for example, it's going to hurt. It's not going to be pleasant, but your body will adapt to it and get more flexible, and you'll be able to do these things more. But you kind of, in order to achieve that improvement through anti-fragility, you have to be willing to work through the initial stages where it might be a little painful, or it might be a little difficult, or there might be some obstacles to overcome, or things like that. Well, Colin, let's we have, the problem that I've got in this podcast is you got so many great ideas, so many things that are passions of mine, that it's hard to kind of pick. But let me ask you, I just wrote last year an article on personal resilience. And I've been thinking a lot about resilience, and a lot of your work has to do with building resilient people. So talk a little bit about the idea of personal resilience and what you do in your professional career to help people be more resilient.
Yeah, so one of the things I always start, and this goes back to the Jamie Smart, but goes on to another thing. I start with, call it headspace, call it meditation. So I always start with that. And I'm a strong believer in the personal resilience. And there's one piece of advice that you get when you're doing meditation is, imagine most people are in the middle of the traffic with loads of cars coming at them, which is all of their thoughts and ideas. And the ability to find a space where you can fall out your thinking, step out of the road, and allow your thoughts to come, but choose which thoughts to have is an important bit. Now, I'm on my 1200th day in a row of meditation. So
that's awesome.
Disciplining yourself to do that. It's a bit like, Tim Ferriss started me in this as well last year, but I heard about him and saying, so pull-ups is one of the best exercises. Now, as a man going into that, I had an ego thinking, I should be able to do 10. He just said start at 1, 2. So personal resilience for me is about building up small incremental changes in your life, so that you don't notice that you're taking it on. As you said with your jiu-jitsu, it's about building to the point where the pain becomes less and you build. So personal resilience is about picking the habits. I work with a habit tracker, so I've got my own habit tracker here. Beautiful. I work with my coaches to work on the habit tracker. Beautiful. I keep variety in there, so I always, a bit like, I love following The Rock. I'm a big fan of The Rock. And he talks about cheat days, cheat days, and I look at his stack of pancakes and I'm going, so I'm thinking that's what I'm aiming at. But, giving yourself cheat days, allowing yourself to have a day off, working in there. So I'm a big fan of a number of things. One is sleep, and finding, whether it's a good friend who wrote a book called Positive Sleep, Giles Watkins, other books that I've read in sleep, getting your exercise, getting your diet sorted, And what started me, and I still use this as an analogy for people, is I started doing triathlons. Nice. And so I'm starting to get people into the mind that it's not just one thing you do. It's not just going to exercise. There's disciplines that you have to build your resilience. So we need to be fit to lead, and therefore fit mentally, fit physically, and we need to give ourselves a break. So those are probably the 3 principles that I would work when I'm working with people. Yeah.
Colin, I started meditating about 15 years ago. And the reason I started meditating was because I was having panic attacks, and I was searching for ways to overcome them. But anyway, I'm 48 years old now, and I have become a preacher to everybody I meet about the power of meditation. And what I tell people is, especially people that like to keep in good physical shape, I say your brain's a muscle. And if you don't exercise it, it's going to atrophy. And if you exercise it through practice like meditation, it's going to get better at serving you. The other thing I'll say about meditation to people that might be thinking about it is, I'll say two things. It's not this woo-woo spirituality. It can be if you want it to be, but it really is just exercise for your mind. And the second thing I'll say is, I think, and this is everybody's experience in meditation without exception, the first couple times you do it, you'll be like, man, I can't stop thinking. It's crazy. Like my mind won't shut the hell up. And but the point of meditation is to recognize that and see that and get a little distance between you and your thoughts and realize that you are not your thoughts. People tend to identify with their thoughts. And I'll tell you the last thing I'll say about meditation, and then I want you to talk a little bit more about it, Colin, because I think it's important, is I think it should be a requirement to run for any political office in the world that you have a meditation practice. I mean, some of these leaders I see would benefit so much from just a little bit of mindfulness practice. They would be so much better at leading us, so much smarter, so much nicer, so much more compassionate, things of that nature. So talk a little bit more about, one more thing I want to say about meditation, Colin. Is it's a selfish act that you're doing for other people. And so like when I'm meditating, I like to remind myself, I'm trying to make myself a better person so I can be a better father, husband, business owner, whatever it may be. So it truly is something that by helping yourself, you're also helping other people around you. So talk a little bit more about how you got started in meditation and what you tell leaders about what they should do in terms of training their mind.
So there's a couple of things that resonate to me. That was a lovely story from the guy who's edited my book for me. And this man is amazing. Robert Wiley. He writes his own poetry. He's had a career in learning and development. He's traveled all over the world, but he's in late stage Parkinson's. So he suffers from Parkinson's, but he just has a beautiful way of articulating, talking about things. And he was telling me the story about his grandfather. And his grandfather was a beekeeper. And his grandfather was so calm around the bees that the bees were always calm. But his grandmother just was so scared and agitated. Every time she came near to the bees, there was this principle that the bees would get agitated as well. And it led us to this concept that for me, meditation is, and headspace, or just, let's put it, falling out of your thinking and slowing down, breathing. Breathing is, the most underrated skill in the world, but just breathing in a situation will allow others to feel calm. Now, I have a philosophy and it's a hypothesis that I want to test for the rest of my life, which is that introverts make the best leaders. Yeah.
Nice.
And one of the reasons is that they aren't the ones talking. They're the ones breathing, thinking, reflecting. Yeah. And so therefore, I encourage people to think about that. And I put that as a hypothesis to them and say, so when you fall out where'd you get your best ideas? When do you fall out your thinking? And most people will say on a run, in the shower, on holiday, on a sunbed. All I say to them is headspace or meditation for 20 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day. Now, I nest my meditation at the end of a workout. So I do my workout and it's my peace time at the end of that. And it's my reward. So I say it's a reward to me.
Yeah.
And then I just do my 20 minutes. Now, it is amazing how often that 20 minutes is the source of my best ideas. As you say, it's not about shutting your thoughts out.
Yeah.
It's about allowing the subconscious mind to raise some of the things. And that's where I get my inspired action from. So, yeah.
It's remarkable. And once you get into meditation, you'll find that there are different types of meditation. For example, there's a meditation called Metta, METTA, which I try to do quite a bit. And it sounds corny as hell, but really what you do is you sit there and you think about people and you wish them well and you wish them happiness. And so one of the metta meditations I do is the first thing I do is you're supposed to imagine somebody who you have an uncomplicated, loving relationship with. So I imagine my daughter. And you're supposed to imagine wish them well, wish them happiness, things of that nature. Then you imagine somebody neutral, same thing. Then you imagine somebody you really don't like,
Yep.
and you wish them well. And what you find, it sounds corny, but what you find after having done that kind of meditation is you just feel better about everything. And you learn that, like, these negative thoughts you have about people, there's an old Buddhist saying that I love.
Mhm.
Holding a grudge against somebody is like holding a hot coal in your hand, thinking it's going to burn somebody else, right?
Yeah.
You find you really you burn yourself. There's another kind of meditation called memento mori, or like meditating on your own death and imagining yourself dying. And that sounds completely bizarre and macabre. But what you'll find when you do that is you actually feel better, because you appreciate
Yep.
the fact that you're a conscious agent, that you're alive, which is a goddamn miracle. I mean, that's just a miracle. And
Yeah. I
so
love that Buddhist piece is the story of Buddha holding a flower up. Don't know if you've heard this one, but holding a flower up. And everybody's thinking, so what's the meaning of the flower? And they're all talking among themselves and thinking, what's the flower? Is it simple? Is it the color? Is it whatever else? And finally, the person on the front row says, he smiles, and Buddha says, he's got it. And he says, so what's he got? And he says, he's just appreciating the flower.
Yeah, I love that.
And we spend most of our life worrying about the significance of whatever else. And, there was a beautiful thunderstorm tonight and rain, and there was a rainbow outside, and the family went out to see the rainbow. How often do we just go out and appreciate what's in front of us? So meditation helps you to see the good in front of you and a leader. And that's the powerful bit for me, which has changed my life.
And nowadays, Colin, it's even more important, because if everybody listening, I want you to think about what your typical waking life is like. I will bet you most people listening to this are getting input from screens into their head basically the entire time you're awake. It's some sort of input, and you never have a chance to have the input stop and to just sit there with your own thoughts. And frankly, a lot of people are afraid to sit there with their own thoughts, but being able to sit still in a room for 20 minutes with no input from anybody and watch your thoughts is a superpower. And so I can't emphasize enough to the people listening to this show, and I know you probably agree with this, Colin. If you're thinking about starting meditation, start now. Start with 5 minutes a day. The thing is just to be consistent about it. Just 5 minutes a day for 14 days. See what you think.
I love it. I mean, it's the going back to the habits principle. Just start the 5 minutes a day. What I started to do was I started to do some Pilates. So I lay down. I thought, well, okay, while I'm laying down, why don't I put some music on I haven't listened to for a while? So I started a habit each day of playing music I haven't played. So Led Zeppelin or whatever else, or finding some new music. So every day I do that. So I nest habits on top of each other. And when you do that, it doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like it's rhythm and practice. It's a system of encouraging yourself to enjoy yourself. Yeah, it's great.
Let's talk about your book. Your book's coming out again, Be More Wrong. It's coming out September 21st. You can actually pre-order it on Amazon right now. I've already pre-ordered my copy. Tell us about the fundamental principles that are in your book that you really want to get across to people.
Yeah. So the first one we've talked about is playgrounds. So how do you create a playground? How do you use the hero's journey to think about creating playgrounds for your people? So that's a big one. And there's ideas, because you need a playground for developing your relationships with your team. You need a playground to develop your story, because stories just don't happen. If they did, people would be writing books and telling stories, and we'd all be great. So how do you create a system to do that? How do you create a system for your energy? How do you create a system for new ideas, which is design thinking? And then how do you create a system for learning, which is, we have an advisory board. I've got 3 advisors that have never been advisors before, non-exec directors was called in the UK, but I've created a playground for them to play. And by the way, they're advising us as well at the moment. So they're our mentors. And then the next bit is coaching. So I'm a big believer in coaching, and you can't tickle yourself. So how do you get tickled? Who's the person in your life who coaches you?
Yeah.
So creating playgrounds for all of those is one principle. The second principle is obviously that this is passionate to me as well, sailing the ship out of the harbor. Most leaders just play at sailing around the harbor. And when you go into most corporates, most people are just, oh, I've got a new ship and I've got a new role and I sail around a little bit. And for any sailors out there, you're thinking, right, so where's the wind today? Where's the real stretch? You think about the America's Cup, think about stretching. So where are you going to take your team today? Where are the rougher seas are you going to do? So the second principle is how you do that, how you stretch people. It goes toward incremental gains, but it's about stretch, everyday purposeful practice to get your team up there. And I suppose the final one is just that embedding of systems and habits, the third thing that's in the book. And it builds on James Clear's work, but it takes it into a leadership context about how do you get systems and habits and how do you help your team to nest habits on top of each other to be more effective in what you do. So those are the three principles. Yeah.
I love that. And, I don't know what you think about, Colin. I'd like your opinion on this, but my belief is, having been around some really phenomenal leaders for basically my whole life, you can learn how to be a leader. Like it's learnable. And you got to work at it. You got to study. You got to try to look at other successful leaders, try to figure out what they're doing. You got to incorporate, reading and study. And then at the end of the day, I think you got to ask yourself, you got to be yourself. You got to be authentic. Like everybody's got to figure out what is their leadership style. But I encourage everybody to go to Amazon and pre-order this book, because I can tell you already from talking to Colin and looking at some of his other work that this is going to be a phenomenal book. I mean, it's exactly what the world needs. It's positive. The stuff in the book is true. It's time tested. These ideas are maybe they're expressed in a new way, but they're fundamentally long-standing principles of how to be a good, positive leader. Colin, we've got a few more minutes. Can I ask you a few more questions? You doing okay on time?
Of course you can. Yeah, no,
okay.
Fine. Yeah, cool.
Who are some of your personal heroes or mentors?
So I've got a big mentor who's unfortunately not with me anymore, which is Randy Taylor, who I mentioned in the book. And he was a student of my grandfather's. So my grandfather was a professor of theology. And so I spent most of my life growing up being Professor A.M. Hunter's grandson. And when I was touring and living in the States, the Taylors took me under the wing. But he was one of the people who brought the North and the South churches together in the U.S. But he also he was the minister at First Presbyterian in Atlanta, and he helped organize the march to Washington. So he brought this differing views of different people. He had this amazing ability to listen to people of different sides of the arguments, extremes in this case with race and everything else in there. And he had the ability to listen with curiosity and make them feel valued. So he was a big mentor. And whenever I'm thinking I'm in a tough place, I just think about him sitting on a rocking chair in Montreat, North Carolina, with a pipe in his mouth, smoking, a bit like Gandalf, and just reflecting. And he was a brilliant dad, a brilliant mentor to me, but he just had that ability to bring all the sides together. So that's one. The second thing that's actually a bit of a surprise for me, and this is quite personal to me, but my father passed away a couple of months ago. And I wasn't really close to my father for a long while. It was only after his death that I realized he'd developed the technology with echo to identify abnormalities in babies' hearts. Wow. But he'd spent most of his life at work. Yeah. It was only when I was reading the almost the eulogies and other things coming out about the people who he'd influenced, I suddenly realized it could have been me. It could have been me, but I never saw him that way because I saw him tired. He lost babies' lives. And therefore, there's a piece for me that I'm using him as a rock for me now, which is leadership and running business is important, but life is important. So how am I treating my daughters? How am I treating my friends? Yeah. And I never get to the point that I do one thing to the detriment of another. So that balance in life. So those would be the two people in my life that I would have said are massive for me. Yeah.
Beautiful. My father's also one of my heroes. He was a Air Force. He was a military officer, flew 200 combat missions over Vietnam, Distinguished Flying Cross. And then his wife, my mom, got cancer when I was 5 years old. My brother was 3. She fought a heroic battle, but died when I was 10. And he raised my brother and I as a single father and didn't miss a single athletic event, continued to work, taught me basically the principles that I continue to live by. And he's just a damn good person. But I'll tell you, I got to tell you you keep mentioning the Lord of the Rings. Okay.
Oh yeah, big
And
fan. Sorry.
no, I told you earlier that I love to read.
Yeah.
And the first book I ever read, I was in
Mm.
third grade, was The Hobbit. And the reason I read that book is because my mother's brother, my uncle, who was somebody I looked up to, had read it. And I was like, well, if Uncle Jack's going to read it. So I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings when I was in third grade. And that is what launched my interest in books. So every time you're referencing Gandalf and Frodo and Bilbo and Mordor and all this stuff, I'm just kind of smiling inside, because that's one of my favorite series of books all time. If you haven't read The Lord of the Rings, most people have seen the movie now, or The Hobbit. The books are fantastic. So matter of fact, I went back about 10 years ago and reread them just because I wanted to see if I liked them as much. And I did. Well, that actually is a great segue into the last question I was going to ask you, Colin, is what is your favorite, or what are a couple of the favorite books that you've ever read? Like, what books do you recommend to other people, or what books do you occasionally reread?
So I read. So let me take my joy of reading, because I like reading for work, and I listen to Audible now, so I do that all the time. So the two, Lord of the Rings is one, but Robert Jordan, The Wheel of Time, is one I'm still into. So I balance my reading in there. And if you've never read The Wheel of Time, it's 13 thick books full. And I remember a story of getting on a plane, and I was sat next to this couple and their son, and the son was sat next to me in a row of four. And I opened my book to read, and it was in the days of when it was paperback and not Kindle or anything else. And I was reading, and I looked over, and here was this probably about 11-year-old boy who was reading exactly the same version of Robert Jordan. He was on the same book, and he was only about 20 pages away from me. And we both looked at each other and went, oh my God, how small a world is this? So that's another good book. On the work side, I've got two staples at the moment that I keep going back to. One is Atomic Habits, James Clear. Yeah. And the other one is a book that I love, which is Exponential Organizations by Ishmael. And it's, the reason for it is it's quite old now, but it's about 10 years old. But it talks about how all the systems within an organization can create the Googles of this world, the Ubers of this world, whether you like them or not. But there's some methods and there's some methodology in there that I keep coming back to our business and going, are we eating our own dog food, and going, so those are the two for the work that I keep coming back to. Yeah.
Beautiful. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, Colin, but during quarantine, I was doing a lot of reading, and it kind of struck me. I was sitting there reading a book by Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, called Six Easy Problems. And if you haven't read that book and you're interested in physics, I would recommend it. But anyway, it occurred to me, I just thought to myself, what an incredible technology the book is. I mean, I am sitting here in Houston, Texas, and the thoughts of one of the world's most famous physicists, are literally going into my brain right now. Like you can travel, you can time travel, you can travel to other countries, you can put the thoughts of the funniest people, the smartest people, the craziest people. I mean, books to me are maybe the most amazing invention ever. And it kind of reminds me of to tie this into leadership, it reminds me of the Charlie Munger quote. Charlie Munger is Warren Buffett's longtime partner. He says, all readers aren't leaders, but all leaders are readers.
I would agree. Yeah. And I think there's a part about that. If you don't start reading till later, you miss out. And I think the Audible, the digital versions have helped that. But, I've got a COO who doesn't read, but she's got Blinkist. So even if you're taking Blinkist and you're putting it in practice, it's great stuff. Because books, people I put 3.5 years into this book. And I iterated it, and I make a joke about it because it's called Be More Wrong. And in theory, I should have got the worst version out to start with, but I kept going. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. So there's 3.5 years of making it better.
And the difference between, to me, the difference between a YouTube video or a blog post and a book is that the book is something that the author has to sit down and struggle over, and it takes time. And
It
so,
does.
and the book has a consistent long form underlying narrative or story if it's well written, unlike a blog post, which maybe doesn't have quite that consistency or doesn't take as much effort or time. Well, Colin, this has been a wonderful time. I've kept you a little bit longer than we reserved, so I really appreciate the time. We could seriously. I've got a whole list of things that we could continue to talk about because
Happy to come back on.
yeah, for sure. Just some amazing topics. And so, and the last thing I'll say is I really appreciate what you're doing in the world. You are a fun, happy, smiling, positive, optimistic person who is trying to make the world a better place. Essentially, you're exactly the kind of leader, exactly the kind of human being that I had in mind when I started this podcast during quarantine. So keep doing what you're doing, my friend. It was an absolute joy to talk to you, and I hope we get a chance to do it again.
Yeah, you take it care, and hope to speak to you soon. Yeah, thanks for Brian for having me on. Cheers.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin.